Joining the Rolling Maul podcast, Striving for Success series is Hamish Riach, whose 17-year stint of Chief Executive of the Crusaders saw the success of winning 6 Super Rugby titles and rebuilding from the ruins of the 22nd of February 2011. Welcome, Hamish. Thanks for joining the Rolling Maul podcast.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
No, we can't thank you enough. And also joining this Striving for Success series is Cameron Gray, the co-host. G'day, Cameron.
Ben, Hamish, how are you guys? You well?
Good man. Hi, Cameron.
Yeah, I'm good. Very excited to have our wonderful guest here, and yeah, let's talk about the Crusaders, the rebuild, and everything in between. Can you tell us about why you left the Crusaders after overseeing a hugely successful period, and did any of that success and associated learnings transfer to your current role as CEO of Ashburton Council?
Yeah, it did. In its essence, my experience is that any great outcomes with your business or your work or your company is because of people. And in many ways, you look at a council and you look at a footy team and they look really different. And of course, on Saturday night, they are a bit different. But the processes to get there, the support and the resources that you can make available to your people to be successful are in fact really similar things. So building teams is just the essence of business success in my experience, and a council workforce and a footy team need the same sort of things in their environment. Of course, the delivery of the particular activity is quite different.
Yeah, I have to admit, listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot in the high performance space, and the one thing we keep hearing from all these podcasts is it's all the people and then the process after. And it's so amazing to hear that, from the Crusaders' success to running the Ashburton Council, you're taking some of that similar stuff. And I think it's really good to hear that, and people in every day in their lives, their roles, their family, their rugby, their sport, they can take that same ideal through.
There's no question about that in my view. I've got, sometimes people are kind enough to ask me to speak, and I start by saying this is what I used to do, and I've got a picture of the boys, winning Super Rugby titles, and there's the fizz in the air and the confetti and everyone chanting their songs, and it's a cool little moment. And then I show a council meeting, which has got none of those things, and it looks really different. But then I try and say that that what you see is just the really tip of a huge iceberg, and everything else has got a lot of similarity, far more similarities than differences in reality.
Yeah, it's just so cool to hear that firsthand, and really what makes both places tick. Following up to that question, are there similar strategies between the roles that allowed you to be successful at the council?
I think so. I think it's that if you think of what makes a footy team successful, it's the collective effort. It's trusting the person on your shoulder to do their job, doing what you need to do for the overall good of the group, rather than the glory for yourself. That's what makes sporting teams successful, and that's the same for our workforce. We've got a value here about working as one at the council, which is essentially, well, what can I do to get a better outcome for the council and the community in this case, as opposed to doing my bit so well that it leaves a problem for someone else. So those things are this idea of working collectively to get great things done, and that's the biggest lesson of all, I think, from my experiences through all my working life, but in really good contrast with the obvious team nature of a team in the sports context, and a less obvious team perhaps at a council, but actually it's very similar.
Yeah, and trust to have the people working to the team goal. Do you find that harder to build at the Crusaders, or do you find it harder to build at the council?
It's probably harder at the council. I think only though because the council is here forever, and things are long term. So great customer service at the council, or delivering projects or delivering gnarly work solutions doesn't have the same finite period like perhaps a footy team does around a campaign. So in particular, your campaign starts in February and finishes in June, and getting a group to focus boots and all on that campaign is perhaps a little more intuitively straightforward than trying to get the team deeply connected, like forever. So yeah, I think the team, I think the rugby is more obvious, and I know Razor's well renowned for the work that he did around themes that would link a group to the cause, and of course he would have a new theme each year to focus on that campaign, whereas the council doesn't operate quite so campaign in that campaign way.
Awesome.
Just want to touch on that, Hamish, really quickly about the themes and whatnot. I've been fortunate enough to have completed the leadership course that the Crusaders offer. I think that might have been instigated during your time there, possibly. I'm not sure. You talk about themes and linking them to the greater good and the cause. How does that dovetail in the council? I get that it's a bit harder. There's people from all walks of life. You've got men and women, and maybe kids as well. How do you build your own theme into your work as a CEO? Is there something joining them together, like you alluded to with Razor?
It is a little harder. We do try and do that. We have our own values, our purpose statements, our collective creation of language that means the same thing to our group, and that's the essence of a theme in the footy team as well. There's no one better at it than Razor. Razor would probably do it better than I do at the Ashburton District Council as well. He's a superb storyteller and connector of people. But in our own way, we are doing and attempting to do the same thing here. We found it much harder here to have a catch cry or a really short mantra phrase that would connect the group, because there's not the same urgency of a campaign or the same narrow focus of what the group's on about, because we have people mowing lawns to running a swimming pool to adding up the money to anything else that a council does. And so everyone's looking at life and the role of the council through a slightly different lens than a footy team trying to win a campaign. So yeah, it is a little harder, but the essence of it is the same. You just have to make sure you don't just try and transplant the rugby way in a new industry, but you just got to take the things of it, getting people together, building the team, wanting people to do collective good work, helping their mate, putting their hand out, not their hand up, all those sort of cliches. As long as you can keep that focus, you can't just take, a Razor theme and drop it into the council. It just doesn't work. That's
yeah. It's got to be unique to the group.
Yes, it does. And the work that we've done here, we've tried to adopt some of the things that I learned when I first started at the Crusaders and in Robbie's time, because he themed too, and he was a very collaborative themer, if you like. He'd have some ideas, but he would develop it in a really collaborative way with the group, so that the team in the end helped create the theme. And that's what we actually adopted here. We got focus groups and all the rest of it to actually what was the essence of the Ashburton Council team that had meaning for them, rather than just trying to have a brilliant idea and imposing it on people.
Just rewinding a little bit to Robbie's time, just something you touched on there. He's a very polarizing figure here in Australia rugby, rightly or wrongly. Just a lot of the narrative at the Crusaders is about Razor and his ascension to the All Blacks role, but just take us into Robbie's mindset around themes. What can you give us an example of what he did well that really elevated the team, please?
Well, he understood the same need for collective purpose as Razor, and we mustn't forget Rob Penney in this story as well. And Pens was a huge part of Canterbury rugby through my time, because I was chief executive of both, so I worked really closely with Pens for many years as well. And he was a great believer in the themes, and Razor was part of the playing group when both Deansy and Pens were coaching. So he learned and could see the power of themes because of the way in which men like Robbie and Rob were doing that work, and he's taken it to his own place with his own personality and style when he became Canterbury and then Crusaders head coach. But at its essence, it's the coach's desire to have language and behaviours that everyone buys into for the collective good of that group. And so Robbie was doing that. Rob Penney was definitely doing it. Todd Blackadder was doing it. Tabs believed it. Tab Matson believed in it. And then Razor's got that sort of flamboyance or his own personality and style, which elevated it. And I think the other thing is that Razor talks perhaps the most openly of all the coaches about the inner workings of a team. He doesn't shy away from some of the stuff that other coaches might not want to talk about publicly. So you're actually seeing it with Razor more obviously because he's prepared to talk about it. It doesn't mean that other coaches weren't thinking along really similar lines and laid the platform for how Razor saw it from those earlier years. And I know if Robbie was on this, he would acknowledge Wayne Smith, who of course was an early Crusaders coach, but before my time. So I got to know Smithy through, rugby circles and his All Blacks involvement, but not as a Crusaders coach. But he was a big part of the collective culture, if you like, of the Crusaders in those early years.
Yes, Smithy, as he's colloquially known, he featured heavily in that Crusaders course, as you know, and he alluded to that. Yeah. And I think he built a video which started that theming process after he took over in '97.
Yeah, I think that's
what was that? Sorry.
Yeah, I've heard that. I haven't. I mean, it was before my time, but Smithy was a huge influence on the Crusaders. That Deansy followed. And then Todd and then Razor in their own ways.
Brilliant. Just want to go back to your first year, full season in charge with the Crusaders. Obviously with Robbie Deans and I guess Razor was playing as well. You went through the season unbeaten. What foundations were laid that year that set you up for the phenomenal success that you experienced in ensuing years? That decade, obviously, bit of a hiccup, mid-2000s, but now it's a juggernaut.
Well, in my own mind, I think the foundations were laid before 2002. I think the unbeaten year was an outcome of the foundations that had previously been laid. So the belief in doing it for your brother, the belief in the team being bigger than the individual, the belief in the Crusaders' way, which was to be humble and gracious, whether you'd won or lost. And 2002 was just this most unique and extraordinary year. The playing group was special. Things dropped into place. We won a number of games by the slimmest of margins. I remember, I was new to professional sport that year, and I remember watching the games on the edge of my seat at times. We can talk about the Waratahs 96 if anyone on this podcast would like to, but if you don't want to,
I'd like to hear about it.
But there were many games that were not 96-19, and I remember the Brumbies. We opened the the new stand at Jade Stadium on a Easter Sunday, and we opened it with a game against the Brumbies, who of course were a very competitive team through those years, and were our nemesis several times, including in 2004. And I remember a drop goal from memory from Aaron Major off his left foot, right on full time to win by a point. So yes, we were unbeaten, but did we just stomp through the competition head and shoulders the best team? Well, history says we were the best team, and no doubt we were. But it didn't mean that every weekend, you ravaged other teams by huge margins. And so it was just one of those campaigns that everything dropped into place on the field. Very, very talented group of players, of course, and that's necessary for those sort of outcomes. A special year, an extraordinary year, on reflection. I think at the time it was almost a shame it was my first year, on reflection, because I don't think I fully appreciated the magnitude of that achievement as we went through it. I loved it. I thought this is wonderful, but it's only 20-something years later, when no other team's done it since, and no one did it before, that you start to go, "Whoa, that was extraordinary that year."
Yeah, it's amazing you mentioned that, because I wanted to speak a bit about 2003, 2010, 5 grand finals, 3 premierships, all won at home, never missed the semis. And 2007 is the first time I made the grand final, which for people listening will know is a World Cup year. And we had some policies in place there. So what's your memories from 2003, 2010, that probably the most successful period, and just when rugby franchises around the world look at a period, that's the period they look at?
Yeah, and you're right. It was, and Deansy had the group going really well, and he was ruthless around selection, around continuing to get a group together that would excel every year. He didn't take anything for granted. He started from scratch. Each campaign laid the foundations, but some very special footy players in that team through that period. I remember the abject disappointment of 2003. I fancy losing a final to the Blues, at Eden Park, to a sold out Auckland crowd. That was just, that was a hard pill to swallow. And I remember we flew home that night from that game, and I remember Robbie said to me during that evening, "This group will benefit from this loss." And I remember saying, "Oh, for God's sake, can't I just be miserable for 24 hours? Heck it." But he's already, that's the difference. Deansy was already thinking about what was next, already looking for positives in our despondency, already considering how that could be turned to some sort of optimistic story when we just lost a grand final. 2004 was just a nightmare in Canberra. I remember that final. It just started badly and got steadily worse for about the first 25 minutes, and a pretty decent fight back from that point. But I think there was a try, was it just after halftime, by big Owen Finnegan, that sort of sank the battleship, really, and it was we didn't quite get there. And then the squad from that point on, 2005, 2006, 2007, as you say, was the year of managing our players for the best national interest. And think about this: the Crusaders lost half their team for half the competition. Think about how that might or might not help your cause. And in my view, that policy, although I know it was well intentioned around getting the All Blacks the best chance of success, but when you look back at it, it didn't work. It hasn't ever been repeated, so there's the proof that it didn't work. And in my view, gifted the Bulls their time in the sun, because they learnt to win. They learnt that group was a big part of the Springboks. They won a World Cup off the back of it. They all went to Europe in 2008, and we managed to get up in the final against good friends, the Waratahs again. And then those South African boys came back to the Bulls in 9 and 10, and they were a tour de force. So a lot of retrospective opinions about 2007. We did pretty well to get to a semi-final, in my view, with the hurdles in front of us. But we just couldn't get to Johannesburg and get a semi done.
Yeah, you talked about the slimmest of margins. In 2002, you win by slimmest of margins. In 2003 to 2010, all the losses in the finals come away from home. Is that one of the slimmest margins you're talking about?
Well, we actually thought we were a pretty decent team away from home, and in fact, I've got a feeling that the Crusaders' record away from home is the best in the competition in terms of win losses. So we didn't. It was never a thing in our heads. We backed ourselves to win games away, just as we did at home. But I guess history says it's a bit harder away, and the other team's got a place to play in the outcome of a final. And if they grow a leg because they're at home, then it can be a little bit tougher. And history says it is tougher. But I never recall any conversations ever about not expecting to do our very best just because we were away.
Yeah. It's just, I just have all the results here. So that's a bit of an anomaly. I just wanted to check in and see if there was anything in the playing group or the coaching group or management group that had any thoughts on that.
No, I know history's important, and you can't, it tells a story, and I know Razor treasured earning, home final both at Canterbury and through the NPC years when we were successful, and when he got into Super Rugby, he valued the home environment, for the group. But actually, if you look at his record, he had and has won plenty of titles where the final game is away, and I've still got the clearest of clear memories about going to Joburg in 2017, and there was 55,000 people at Ellis Park. I reckon 54,970 were supporting the Lions, and there was 30 of us and about 3 people that had come on a plane to support us. A hell of an environment, and we prevailed in the most hostile of venues away from home. So it shows you can win titles, and even last year, the Chiefs had a wonderful year, and we pipped them in Hamilton. The year before, the Blues looked the best team for most of it, and we won in Auckland. So I don't know. It's not a mindset thing. Maybe it's about the other team. Maybe the other fellow grows an extra leg more than a hurdle for us.
Yeah, no, just so good to hear those insights. We just don't get to hear those insights of someone who's been in a professional environment for near on 2 decades.
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Just want to fast forward to 2011.
Yeah.
22nd of February. 6.3 magnitude earthquake strikes Christchurch. 185 deaths. Numerous injuries. One of your Crusaders board members tragically passes away. I know this is not about you, but just fill the listeners in, just for a bit of context. Where were you at the time? What were you doing? And I guess, what were you thinking?
Yeah, gosh, it's still an emotional memories, really.
Take your time.
Yeah. And Phil was a real friend, a board member that was killed, and so I think the city's tragedy is, I still feel really personally. But at the time, my memory is that it was 12:51 on that day. So I was actually in the office. We'd had the earlier earthquake in the September, which had been early in the morning, and we'd been rudely awakened, but we could see the power of a major earthquake. This one I was in the office. We dived under the desk. There was paper and shit and office stuff flying everywhere, as you can imagine. We managed to get out onto the car park. We sort of counted heads. We had everybody out. There's two immediate lasting memories. One was because I was also the chief executive of Canterbury Rugby, and we had the most treasured provincial trophy in New Zealand rugby, the Ranfurly Shield. Canterbury were the holders, and in our desperate scurry to get out of the shaking building, we were all standing in the car park, and I thought, fuck, I've left the Shield inside. And I thought, Jesus, of all the stories the Shield's got, of all the things, the storied, the untold, the half known, the myths, the legends of the Shield, it's not going to be buried on my watch just because there's a bloody earthquake. So I actually went back into the building and amongst some of the aftershocks and grabbed the Ranfurly Shield to get that out. It had a little bit of trouble getting it home because in the effort to try and find your own loved ones, we made sure all our people were safe. And in those days, the office was separate from the playing group, so you just had to look after your immediate group. And then you want to know how your family was. So I was trying to get home, and all of Christchurch was trying to get home at the same time amongst all the aftershocks. And so the traffic jams, no one knowing what was going on, the trauma, all of that. In the end, I got halfway home and I abandoned my car because I just couldn't. It was just going so slow, and so I ran home with having abandoned my car. Managed to check in with the family, and everyone was thankfully okay. But later on that evening, I thought again, Jesus, if there's looting and pillage tonight, and they see my car just sort of randomly parked in the middle of a road by Hagley Park, the Shield's at risk. So we had to go back in the early part of the evening and try and rescue the Shield for a second time, which we succeeded in doing.
Wow.
And then the other memory of that immediate moment was, and this is a little treasured memory, Canterbury Rugby was having its salary cap audit. And we had the auditors in my office. I had a bit enough space, and there was a second desk, and they were in there. So the auditors, bless them, were also under the desk with all their audit papers flying everywhere, and with the same colour as everyone else. They had all the colour of this white shirt. Yeah. So we were sorting out the audit office, and we knew the team reasonably well, the audit team. And one of the guys said to me at the end of it, he said, right, he says, you've passed your fucking audit. What's the quickest way home? And it was true. It was when he never came back. We could have had all the fiddles you would have liked that year because they came back to check a second time, for which we were eternally grateful. Not that there were any fiddles to find, of course. So that was the Shield and the audit and our people safe were the most overriding memories. Yeah. Family was safe. That was a huge relief. And then we got the news about Phil in the middle of that night, and it made it all dreadfully real. One of the things that I clearly remember is because all the power was knocked out, all around the world, people were getting images that we didn't see. We didn't have the same pictures that were on TV because we didn't have TV, we didn't have any power, and I was relying on good old radio to hear the state of my city, and it was being described pretty graphically, and it was horrendously emotional. I thought I couldn't see how we were going to come through it as a city in those first 12, 24 hours. You just thought it was Armageddon. It was a dreadful thing. I couldn't see how we could resurrect a footy team in the carnage of a city. And then once you get past the very first bit of it, you take deep breaths, and you just take 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, 1 week at a time, and in the end, that's what resilience is, isn't it? You can't survive catastrophe in 6-month blocks. You just got to keep plodding, keep breathing, keep doing your work 1 hour at a time, and in the end, the time frame starts to extend, and a number of years later, you realise you got through it.
You're talking about regrouping, the collective, resurrections. You know, I think most pundits, despite the squad you had, probably thought you were done. I think Jade Stadium, after the fact, got condemned. Your players would have been uncertain, coaches would have been uncertain. I'm sure there would have been uncertainty for you. But you regroup, you resurrect.
Yeah.
You've got to go and play in London where you don't have to. I think that was a commercial decision based on what I read. You got no home ground. You're rescheduling on the fly.
Yeah.
And your city, as you put it, is in an Armageddon-like state. Emotionally, physically, how do you get the players to regroup and put out performances?
Yeah,
like they did.
And the players deserve, and the coaching group, you know, the direct management team around them deserve immense credit for the way they approached it. And we had many meetings. Often the playing group, the senior players, would meet at Todd Blackadder's house. And do you know, through that entire time, they never once referred to the earthquake as an excuse for not winning the title. So that group, and there were difficult moments, and there were individuals that travelled a different path with their own experiences, of course. But as a group, they committed to not letting the earthquake be an excuse. Remarkable men, all dealing with their own wives, kids, neighbours, families, parents, that all had their own emotional state around the earthquake. But as a group, when they got together, they never once said, well, actually doing well will be okay this year, or let's just do our best and it'll be fine. It was, what are we doing now that's still giving us the best possible chance of winning the title? It was a very impressive, you know, thing to witness. And you know, Corey Flynn and Brad Thorne and Richie and Dan, they were all part of that senior leadership that simply wouldn't allow anything to get in the way. Very, very impressive. And as I think of it now, we got wonderful support from the Hurricanes. They allowed us to not go to that first game immediately after. That was important. Players were dealing with a lot of their own shit, their own families' trauma and emotional states, and they needed to get the home patch a little bit settled before they could turn their mind back to footy. So having the option not to play that first game, we were always grateful to the Hurricanes. And of course, they took the financial hit from not having that game, but they never once complained, never once. So wonderful support from them as an organisation. And then my memory says we had the next couple of games in Nelson. And Tasman Nelson's always been a wonderful supporter and part of the Crusaders franchise, the Crusaders region, the Crusaders story. But 211 was never more important. Without them, we didn't have a platform to play. And there was some massive emotion in one of those. I can't remember if it was the first game or the second game up there, because there'd been a mining disaster on the West Coast the previous November at Pike River.
Pike River,
yeah. And the West Coast is also in the Crusaders region. And we had been wanting to honour the trauma in that community via their love of rugby and the Crusaders. And we had arranged that we would wear the red and white candy jersey of the West Coast. The only time, still to my knowledge, that we haven't worn a Crusaders strip in a competition game. And so we wore their jersey out of respect. And I remember Todd and I met with some of the families who had lost men in the mine before we played that day. And man, you know, there's emotion and tears, and it's sort of, you know, big heart emotional stuff, and you're remembering your own stuff, and then you meet someone who, you know, just lost their son in the mine, and it gets pretty emotional. So we played in the Pike River jersey, or the West Coast jersey. One of those, I think it was the second game, that big earthquake in Japan hit, where the nuclear plant and all those thousands of people were killed. And I remember sitting in the stand at Trafalgar Park, and the reports of this massive tragedy in Japan started to come through. You know, we were watching our game, we're surrounded by our own, you know, emotions, and then suddenly you're starting to get images of that tidal wave sweeping through that Japanese town, and that was, you know, traumatic and difficult. And then we had great support from Timaru. We played several games in Timaru. I mean, we managed to put a very compelling performance against the Bulls on in Timaru a bit later in the campaign, where we kept them to 0. I remember that really clearly, that the Bulls team got exactly 0 in Timaru, and we got a couple more than that. So it was a lovely night out. And then you've referred, Cameron, to Twickenham, or to their game in London, and so through all this time, once you get through the first couple of days, for all this time, you're trying to work out how you can keep your financial ability to survive. New Zealand Rugby Union lent us some money, so that paid a few bills. We did have business interruption insurance, but my experience of arguing the merits of our case with the insurance company was difficult and at times quite soul destroying about things that we thought we were covered for that they saw differently. And so we thought we've got to get control ourselves. We can't just rely on insurance cover making this possible, or a loan from somebody. We've got to try and get on the front foot. So you're right, Twickenham was a commercial decision. It was timed around a bye the following week for us. So we were able to see that the travel wouldn't be, you know, too impactful. And that was that year. So we played the Sharks in London, and John Plumtree was coaching the Sharks, and he's a Kiwi. And he just, such admiration for him, he just said, we're going to play our part for the Crusaders and for Christchurch. And I don't think a native, not just South African, but a native from anywhere else would have had the same empathy as Plum did. And so the Sharks agreed to that game. The Rugby Union in England made it all possible. Usually when you try and have these overseas games, and I know there's a couple coming up for the Crusaders overseas, but the administrative hurdles to get these in place are really high. Well, we managed to get through all the hurdles because people were genuinely empathetic for our cause. I remember the day of our game, there was a memorial service at Westminster Abbey for the Christchurch earthquakes, and it was going to clash with our game. Can you believe it? You put everything in place, and then suddenly there's something else on in London for the earthquake, and we managed to get through to the cheeses at Westminster, and people had told us they'd never change for anything. Like they are what they are, and they're an institution of some gravitas in history. And if they decide there's going to be a memorial service at 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon, that's when it's going to be. And we said, well, we're going to have a crack anyway. So we found some people of influence, and we managed to persuade the hierarchy at Westminster Abbey to move the memorial service so it didn't clash with our game. And there were people in London in particular who were utterly staggered that Westminster Abbey, that wonderful institution, would actually make a change to support a game of rugby. But that was the sort of support we had around the world. That was the way people felt about, you know, the story that was unfolding post earthquake. Marvelous.
I'm just reading between the lines here. DC rang Harry, didn't he?
Well, you know, someone rang someone. I don't know if Harry was. Well, no, he was the patron of the English Rugby Union then, wasn't he? I think. Yeah, look, something happened.
I'm sure he's connected to the right people.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is. It was a special memory too. We managed to attend that service at Westminster Abbey once the time changed. we were then able to sit there and I remember Anton Oliver, who was a fierce competitor at the Highlanders of Crusaders rugby when he played, spoke beautifully and eloquently and empathetically about the Christchurch earthquake. I think he was in London at the time, and as a footy player and a Kiwi, he spoke at the memorial service and spoke, beautifully.
Brilliant. Just fast forwarding a little bit to the end of the season. You're on the precipice in Brisbane.
Yeah.
You can't really get much closer. I can't remember where you'd come from the week before, but you endured some travel.
Cape Town.
It's a long flight. I've taken it. What's your community thinking? You're almost the pillar or the beacon for them to look to. Their town has been ravaged. Their city's been ravaged. How did they respond to seeing the men just employ a no excuses policy and nearly get it done? What did that do for the community, and how did that set you up for the success that you're going through now?
Look, it was a massively important thing. I think the Crusaders were able to, in a very tangible way, demonstrate that things are going to be okay. And it didn't matter if you were a rugby fan. It didn't matter if you liked footy. But the story showed everyone that there's hope. That things are going to be okay. That life's going to continue. That yes, we've got our individual traumas, and the city's got a huge recovery ahead of it. But here's the optimism. Here's the beacon of hope. And I've thought about that final a lot, and it's often been written about as the travel. You've got no home games for an entire season, and the travel in the end was a step too far. And my own view is that was definitely part of it. But I think if we had our time again, we probably wouldn't have, just for one more week, we might have wanted to be a little more insular, because I remember the hotel, I don't remember its name now, but I remember the hotel had, it was very hard to be private in that hotel, the way the layout of the hotel was. I remember even the lifts were, glass lifts, so you could see people going up and down to their rooms. The foyer areas were really public, and there was such support from home and from Australia. Don't get me wrong, we had a lot of support, but the team got utterly swamped by well wishers that week, all with the best of intentions. But I think in some small way, it wasn't the best environment to prepare for a grand final. And I think if we had our time again, we might say that hotel we should probably have walked away from once we saw how it was laid out, and got somewhere a lot more private. Just regathered the group, just got tight as the bunch of brothers, and we might have got it done on the Saturday night. The Reds were a good team. Craig Cooper in their pomp, they were a good side, and they'd earned the right to the final, and they earned the victory on the day. I actually also think that not getting it done that night was a fine gift to the All Blacks, because there were some fine All Blacks in our group who were bitterly disappointed with that outcome. And when the World Cup rolled around and they're facing the same men in a different coloured jersey, I'd like to think that there was just a little bit of extra incentive to correct the disappointment in Brisbane when it came to the World Cup.
Geez, I think you're being a bit harsh. The slimmest of margins, really. Let's be honest. There was a bit of Will Guinea magic when he scored that brilliant try. You weren't. It's not like you got flogged.
Oh no. But sport is margins. That's the thing. What would have been a 1% difference that might have meant the result was different. That's what I mean. The hotel was perfectly fine. The food was lovely. The people were great. Training facilities were all there. It's not sport. Robbie Deans had this wonderful saying. He said, "Hamish, rugby is a game of inches. You've got to earn every inch in order to prevail at the end of the contest." And it's that that's that fine line in professional sport. Reds are a good team. So if you only got 1% off, that might be why you didn't get it done. I don't know. You second guess yourself all the time, with hindsight, and who knows if I'm right or not.
In the Sam Whitelock, in his own words video, just been on the Crusaders Facebook just before Christmas, there's the amazing emotional scenes as the Crusaders land back home.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about that? It just seems like the whole community had come out, and it was nearly like this was the end of the first chapter after the earthquake. It was just, I cried watching it a week ago.
Yeah. It was the support was overwhelming. It was just overwhelming, and that support was pride in what that group had achieved, with the hurdles that were in their way. It was pride in, performance. As you say, we didn't get flogged in the final. It was all but there, and it was back to that sense of who we were as a city and what it means to be a Cantabrian, and you can put some shit in our way, but actually we're going to find a way through that, and we're not going to complain while we do it, and we're not claiming anything that we're not. I used to say, we're a footy team. There's all sorts of heroes in the city. There's all sorts of big decisions that need to be made to resurrect a city. We were playing a game of footy, and we just wanted to do it to the very best we can, and to give people some pride in what it meant to live in a damaged city. And I think we achieved a win, lose or draw by the time we got to the final. I remember the semi in Cape Town. From recollection, Matt Todd had a pretty influential role at the end of that game, just from my memory. If we'd lost in Cape Town and had gone back to Christchurch, I think we would have had the same response. By then the support was just overwhelming for what we'd achieved to get there. And the diehard fans love you no matter what, so when you lose a final, the diehard fans are already, they're still right behind you. But to get a city behind you requires a slightly different context or a different, set of circumstances. And that's what we had that year.
Yeah, it's just, I applaud anyone to go back to Crusaders Facebook and watch that, Sam Whitelock in his own words. It's just so moving.
Yeah, for sure.
Just want to, just really conscious of time, Hamish. So I just want to get cut through a few questions, but and just talk about the rival of Razor. Obviously, 14, you go close again. Very, very unlucky in the final. I thought harsh decision, could have gone either way. Fast forward to 2017.
Yeah.
I would say probably the first publicly breakdancing coach in New Zealand rugby, which generally is a very conservative nature.
Yeah.
Particularly if you look at Graham Henry and Steve Hansen, I would say they're pretty beige people. I know Shag's got a few good one-liners in him. But you talk about themes, but what did Razor do that set you up for the dynasty that the club's going through at the moment? Just take the listeners through that little period, his arrival and the ensuing success, please.
Yeah, so I think arrival at the Crusaders needs dispelling. When I started in 2001, he's a player at the Crusaders. When he finished his stint overseas, he came back to Christchurch and started coaching his beloved Sumner club, and moved them from Div 3 to Senior A rugby. Rob Penney brought him into the Canterbury team, which trained at the same venue as the Crusaders, so a very similar environment, albeit a very different competition. And brought him in a helping role 1 year, which grew into an assistant coach role, which grew into, when Penn's left for Munster, Tambai Matson coached Canterbury in 2012, and now he's got Aaron Major and Scott Robertson as his right-hand men. Tabs moved on, and now Razor's coaching the Canterbury team as a head coach, and he has immediate success in 2013. And all through that time, I'm in the office knowing Razor well. So I knew Razor pretty well. I regard him as a mate, but I also knew his capability. I knew the things he brought to all those teams. So when Todd's time was done, we felt that Razor was the best person for that role, and had confidence that he would be successful, perhaps in time. I don't know that any of us thought 2017 was going to go quite the way it did, but he didn't. Like, Razor didn't arrive as someone from the other side of the world with a reputation that we didn't know. He was one of us. We knew him well, and we knew his capability. And then, and I remember, here's a story. I don't even know if I've told Ray this, but one of those victories we had with Canterbury in the NPC, and at the end of our win, there was a player sort of had spent every ounce of energy he had. He was sort of, the young backs are all celebrating, and some of the gnarly forwards have given every ounce of energy they've got, and they're slumped in the corner. And I said to one guy, "What about this campaign? What's the standout thing from this campaign for you?" And I expected him to talk about the theme or the teamness or the enjoyment or whatever. And he looked at me and he said, "I get the best technical rugby coaching in this environment of anywhere I've ever played." And that's Razor, because he was a loose forward, and Razor was deeply interested in loose forwards having played there. So you see, so yes, there's the theming, and yes, there's the breakdancing, and yes, there's the personality, and yes, there's the persona, but at his core, man, he is a clever rugby man. And I hear him just recently saying that Joe Smith, now got the Wallabies, he's a big rugby mind, Joe, and that is true. But don't ever think that Razor hasn't got a big rugby mind either. He's a very, very deep thinker about the game, a very clever coach in his essence, and the things that people see are not the whole man, in terms of what the group gets. So 2017, we knew that we would be in good hands. A very young playing group. The campaign didn't start particularly well, and we were on the rack down in Dunedin, and there was a comeback there, assisted by a yellow card to the Highlanders' backs, and Big Setter scored a superb try down in the corner. We pinched that game, and somewhere in the victory there, we switch was flicked. Yeah. There was some belief following Dunedin that transformed the young group, and with the support they had from Razor and his knowledge and his energy and his team connections, that group believed that they could do it, and the story went from there. But if that game had gone differently, what would have happened to the group? It's just the slimmest of margins, eh?
In the course, as I alluded to, the Crusaders leadership course, there was one section which I thought, wow, maybe this is the key differentiator, and you could probably attest to this. Razor talked about alignment, not so much on the field, but he talked about your marketing department, your CEO, your committee or your board, and your players. There's got to be unequivocal alignment. Do you think that's also the secret, and that's what's helped perpetuate the dynasty?
I do. I actually do. It's part of our reason for success. Equally, I watched the Brumbies win a final when they sacked the coach. So I think I don't think there's not one size fits all. It absolutely critical for us, absolutely critical for Razor to know everyone's in the Wako rowing exactly the same way. That doesn't mean that a different group can prevail with a different set of circumstances, but it's absolutely our story. It's absolutely and perhaps over time, that alignment is necessary for sustained success. Perhaps you can win on a Saturday, you can even win an individual campaign with other hurdles, but maybe that's part of the Crusaders' sustained success. It's certainly really important to Razor. He needs to know all the people around him doing the right thing for the right reason. Yeah.
Just for our Australian listeners, just define what a waka is, and perhaps the metaphor that you use. Just a little bit about that.
So waka is a traditional Maori canoe. So if you think of the waka needing to make progress across the water, it's every person in that canoe in time with their, doing their job in the right time and sequence. So you got the bloke at the back who thinks that no one can see him and he's not paddling as hard. The waka won't go as fast as it otherwise would. So it's everyone doing their bit in concerted effort.
Brilliant. I appreciate that. I think our Australian listeners will really cherish that.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not that far apart, but the language is crazily different in some ways.
Yeah. Language is a barrier, isn't it?
Oh, yes. And sometimes the size and the absolute passion over there can be an absolute barrier to Australians winning too. But that's another podcast, another day.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough. It's been just mind-blowing. It's just, I'm edge of my seat. I can't believe the insight, what you're willing to let us know, the personal stories. I really, really hope the listeners love it. I know I've loved it. I don't want to speak for Cameron, but I can see him nodding his head on the video. I just want to leave with one last question. It goes a bit down to more the backfield of rugby. What in the amateur part of the game can people do to elevate their clubs so that both on and off field performance are executed to a high standard?
Look, in my view is that everyone involved have to enjoy it. They have to enjoy what they're doing. If you get a volunteer who feels obliged to put the corner flags out because there's no one else to do it, then you've got a problem. If you've got your players turning up because their favourite uncle said you should play rugby, but their heart's not in it, then there's a problem. Everyone's got to, and I'm a little bit older than you guys. I've got children and grandchildren, and I see that if they enjoy what they're doing, then they'll stay involved. But in the end, what community rugby needs is people to participate, to enjoy it, to stay involved in the game, and then let the game itself allow the cream, the best, to come because they've stayed in the game. But if the talented kid has got all sorts of options, and Australia's a fantastic example, even in the footy code sense, you can go and play 3 or 4 different games, just possibly equally as successfully in many cases. You've certainly got a lot of choices, and league and Aussie rules and rugby have got similar skill sets, perhaps, particularly early on before you get too far developed. So there's choices. So if kids are enjoying what they're doing, they'll stay involved in the thing that they're enjoying. But if it becomes a chore or an obligation or a drag, then they're gonna drift away. So I think the whole game needs that. And how often have you heard at the professional level a young fella will get down to a different team environment and they might say they've rediscovered their love of rugby. Yeah. And you think, gee, where did the love go? Well, it went because that wherever they were previously wasn't giving them the joy in what they were doing that they needed. I've heard our guys say when Razor was coaching the Canterbury NPC team that some of the boys would say they hated the day off because they just wanted to come back in and have some more fun with their mates and soak up the positive energy, and they'd have a day off and they'd, oh bugger, it's Wednesday. I wish it wasn't, So, so if you can replicate that at schools and your colleges and out on the club land and keep people involved, that's the best possible thing you can do for elite sport.
Yeah, absolutely, just brilliant. I think there'd be so many people out there that completely agree with you, and they'd be wondering decisions made in the ivory towers that forget that. But again, I know it's getting late over there in New Zealand. You have a wonderful Ashburton Council to run. I can't thank you enough. I'll let Cameron say the final word, but so nice to meet you. And yeah, if we cross paths in the rugby world somewhere, I'd love to have a beer with you and thank you in person.
That's cool. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Hamish. I notice you're still using the word "we" a lot, eh? So once you're there, you're always there, are you?
You are. You are. Your heart never leaves. And I was a Christchurch boy before I worked for the Crusaders too. So it's my team for sure.
Where did you go to school? You at Boys High or?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Oh, I've got a friend from Boys High. He just does not shut up. Honestly, he's telling everyone Will Jordan's his cousin.
Yeah, he probably is.
I think so. No, brilliant. I really appreciate your time. As been alluded to, some great insights for our listeners, particularly in the amateur part of the game, that you can still execute high performance in an amateur zone. So thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm delighted to do this. And I think I'm just far enough away now to, perhaps be able to reflect. When I first left footy, it's a hard thing to leave when you love what you do. This has been a good change for me as well. But it's now quite nice to reflect a few years later. So you've done me a favour. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for being authentic and vulnerable. I could see that here. Our listeners probably couldn't, but it was great to get those insights.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.